Happy Kansas Day, everyone. I'm Mrs. Smoke, and I'm dialing in from the Wichita Public Schools. And with me is one of my favorite Kansas history experts in all of the great Sunflower State, Mrs. Lois Herr. Hello, Lois. How are you?
Hello.
Happy
Fine.
Kansas Day.
Happy Kansas Day to you too.
So, it's the sun is shining in the Kansas world today.
Yes, it is.
And,
So,
if we're going to have a birthday party, it needs to be a bright, sunny day, don't you think?
it is a perfect day to celebrate our birthday.
I love that. And today you're going to be talking to us about some of Kansas's ABCs. I'm going to hand it over to you. And so, students, let's hang out with Lois.
Thank you. So today we're going to talk about Kansas ABCs. So I'm so glad that you are letting me join you today for Kansas Day. We're going to go through the alphabet from A to Z, and there are so many fun and interesting things to talk about. And I could only choose 26 because there's only 26 letters in the alphabet. So I'm sure you have a lot of ideas as we go through that I did not choose. So if you can put those in the chat, we can touch on some of those and you can share those after we get to the letter Z. So in order to get from A to Z, I'm going to have to go pretty quickly. And so let's get started. So Kansas is the place to be. Let's see Kansas A to Z. So A is for airplane. Kansans began making and flying airplanes not long after the airplane was invented. We made so many airplanes in Kansas that Wichita, Kansas became known as the air capital of the world. And today, airplanes are still made in Wichita. B is for bison.
We're not seeing the pictures change. Let's try that right arrow on your keyboard. Let's see if that moves them.
Do you see that?
Not yet, unless it pop it through. No worries. Let's hit the escape button one more time. Sometimes computers just have minds of their own. So we may need to do, if that escape button isn't working, we may have to do a reshare, but we're getting there. And I am from Wichita, so the air capital of the world is one of my favorite parts about Kansas.
Okay.
Oh, you can see them. They can see them. We just keep going. Maybe on my side, the friends can see them. You just keep making it happen.
Okay. So everybody can see this?
And friends, if you could type in the chat that you can, we're good. But you keep going, Lois.
Okay, so this should be B for bison. And a long time ago, the bison, or the American buffalo, as it's also called, shared itself with the American Indians that lived here so they could have food, shelter, and clothing. When settlers moved to the new state of Kansas, the bison was hunted almost to extinction, and that means there were almost no bison left. Luckily, Kansas is once again home to bison, and it's our state mammal today. C is for capital. The Kansas State Capitol building is in the city of Topeka. This is where laws for the state of Kansas are made, where the governor of the state of Kansas has an office, and where artwork telling the story of Kansas is on display. You and your family are invited to visit our beautiful Capitol building today, and visitors can even climb 296 steps to the top of the dome. That's the highest part of the entire building, and on this photo of the Capitol, it's the very tip top of the roof, so you can go that high if you come to the Capitol building and take a tour. D is for the Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. So raise your hand if you have seen the movie The Wizard of Oz. Okay. I thought a lot of you would probably have seen it. I know I've seen it myself. Well, The Wizard of Oz is actually both a book and a movie. And it's the story of a Kansas farm girl named Dorothy. And Dorothy is transported to the imaginary land of Oz. There she meets a scarecrow, a tin man, and a lion who help her return home to Kansas. This is a picture of a very old Wizard of Oz toy in the collections of the Kansas Museum of History. And E is for Eisenhower, and more specifically, it's for President Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower grew up in Abilene, Kansas, and became the 34th president of the United States. While he was president, Eisenhower created the interstate highway system. Many, many people drive across the great state of Kansas on interstate highways today, thanks to President Eisenhower. And I bet many of you have ridden on them too. If you've ridden on I-35 from Wichita up to Salina, or if you've driven on Highway 70, those are part of the interstate highway systems. So F is for farming. Farming is very important in Kansas. Farmers grow wheat, corn, soybeans, cotton, milo, and many, many other crops. This photo shows a farmer harvesting a field of wheat. And growing wheat in Kansas farms is so important that Kansas is known as the breadbasket of the world. And why breadbasket, you might ask? Because most bread is made from wheat. And G is for grass. At one time, native prairie grasses like that in this picture covered most of Kansas. It fed wild animals like bison, deer, and antelope, and it later fed domestic animals like cattle, sheep, and goats. Today, the Flint Hills of Kansas is one of the last remaining pieces of native prairie grass in the whole United States. And H is for Home on the Range, the Kansas state song. A long, long time ago, a man living in western Kansas wrote a poem about the log cabin he lived in. He had a friend who played the guitar, and that friend decided to turn the poem into a song by putting the words to music. Even though there was no post office, no telephones, and no computers, people still heard the song and they loved it. Home on the Range is still sung today, and especially on Kansas Day. And I think probably a lot of you will sing it today too. This picture is a piece of Home on the Range sheet music from the collection of the Kansas Museum of History. I is for I love Kansas. So if you love Kansas, raise your hand. Oh, I bet there's lots of hands up out there. So, and that's good to see. There are so many great things to love about Kansas, from the wide open skies to the wonderful people who live here. One thing that I love about Kansas are the wildflowers that grow here when the weather's a little warmer for longer than it is today. Kansas is a day to show our love and pride for Kansas. And J is for January. January is a very important month for Kansas because January 29th is Kansas Day, and that's today. This is the day Kansas became a state, which makes it Kansas's birthday. And I hope you're having fun celebrating Kansas Day this year, and I'm very happy that you decided to spend it with me, or at least part of it. K is for the Kanza, the American Indian nation that Kansas is named after. You may also have heard them called the Kaw. Long before Kansas became a state, the Kanza lived here. Their name means wind people. The Kanza Nation was eventually forced to leave Kansas and move to Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. But several years ago, they created a memorial park near Kansas Grove, Kansas, on the site of the last Kaw Indian village in Kansas. And L is for Little Jerusalem Badlands State Park, the newest state park in Kansas. This park contains tall rock spires and rugged cliffs created when most of Kansas was at the bottom of a gigantic ancient ocean. Just imagine, at one time there were fish and sharks and mosasaurs swimming in and out of the rocks in this picture. This looks like what I think the bottom of the ocean looks like today. M is for Mount Sunflower. And it may not look it from this photograph, but Mount Sunflower is the highest point in Kansas. It's in western Kansas, very close to the state line where Kansas and Colorado meet. It isn't a hill and it isn't a mountain, but it is the highest point in Kansas, and it is on land created from sand and gravel that wore off the Rocky Mountains and were washed eastward downstream millions of years ago. And all that sand and gravel created our Mount Sunflower. N is for Niwala. And I bet that's a word many of you haven't heard before. Niwala is actually the word Halloween spelled backwards. So if you look at this picture, the word underneath it spells Niwala, Neewollah. Now, if you start at the end with the H and go backwards, it's Halloween, and that spells Halloween. The city of Independence began holding a Niwala parade over 100 years ago. The festivities grew so big that today there are 3 Niwala parades instead of just one. It's one of the many parades that take place in Kansas each year. O is for one-room schools. At one time, most students in Kansas attended a one-room school like the one in this picture. Students sat in the same room with their younger and older brothers, sisters, and friends. One teacher taught everyone, and a wood stove kept the school warm and was used to heat the lunches that students brought from home. As each grade recited their lessons at the front of the classroom, the other students worked on their own lessons at their desks. P is for Pizza Hut. And I bet most of you like pizza. I know I do. Did you know that at one time most people in Kansas had not heard of pizza? In fact, a lot of people in the United States hadn't heard of pizza. 2 brothers in Wichita decided that they wanted to start a new business, so they decided to open a restaurant that served pizza. They wanted to introduce Wichita to a food that they had recently been introduced to themselves. The brothers named their restaurant Pizza Hut, and people in Wichita loved pizza. And then people outside Wichita really started liking pizza, and soon Pizza Hut restaurants could be found not just in Wichita and not just in Kansas, but across the United States. Q is for quilts, especially quilts that tell us about Kansas. This is one of those quilts. The state of Kansas can be divided into 105 counties, and each one of those 105 counties make up a square of this quilt. Each square tells us something important about the county that made it. And since every county is different, every square is different. And do you see the orange square that's kind of in the middle of the quilt that looks kind of like a jack-o'-lantern? Well, Montgomery County made that square to tell people about a famous parade that happens in Montgomery County each year. Can you guess what that county is? Raise your hand if you think you know what it is. Yeah. If you guess the Niwala parade that we just talked about, you are right. So that quilt square, that orange quilt square, represents the county that that parade takes place in. R is for ranching. Ranching is very important in Kansas, and cattle is what can be found on most ranches here in Kansas. Soon after Kansas became a state, people started to bring their cattle here. They discovered that eating Kansas grass made cattle very, very healthy, and there have been ranches here ever since. The rancher in this picture is riding a horse, but today ranchers sometimes ride ATVs too. Whatever ranchers ride, they need to be able to move around their ranch and take care of their cattle. S is for sunset. And Kansas is known for its colorful sunsets. The sky at the end of the day often turns brilliant shades of orange and pink and yellow as the sun gets lower in the sky. Sunsets happen everywhere in the world, but because much of Kansas is so wide open, we can see them better here than people who live with mountains and tall trees. The sunsets in Kansas are so great that people take pictures of them. In fact, someone recently counted the sunset pictures on the internet on Instagram, and Kansas' sunsets are ranked 10th in the world for the number of sunset photos posted on Instagram. And T is for trains. Railroad trains carry people, and they also carry the things that people need, like the train in this picture. Trains were very, very important for Kansas, even before Kansas became a state. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad was one of the largest railroad companies in the United States, and it was started in Kansas. It was started to provide a fast way to travel to Santa Fe, New Mexico from the Kansas towns of Atchison and Topeka. And U is for underground, because what is underground in Kansas is very important, not just to Kansans, but to people around the world. Some things underground get dug up like salt, gypsum, and zinc. And not all of those are dug up like these two men in the picture are digging coal, but it's still necessary to go underground to reach them. Some things are brought to the surface with pumps, like the petroleum we use to make gas for our cars, the helium used in hospitals and to make balloons float into the air, and the water that people and animals drink and that farmers use to water their fields. And we shouldn't forget the nutrients that are in the ground itself. Seeds that farmers plant underground in the soil grow food eaten by people around the world, as well as us here in Kansas. Those same nutrients make the grass healthy for all the cattle living on Kansas ranches. V is for vitamins. Vitamins are something our bodies need to be healthy and grow strong. They're in the food we eat and even in the sunshine coming through the windows. Sometimes we need more vitamins than we can get in our food, and we're able to buy bottles of vitamin supplements like the ones in the picture. We can thank a Kansan, Mr. Elmer McCullum, for the discovery of vitamins A, B, D, and E, and those are all important vitamins for our body. W is for wetlands. A wetland is an area where shallow water covers the ground all year. One reason wetlands are important is because they're home to many types of birds and animals. Cheyenne Bottoms, here in this picture in Kansas, is recognized as being a wetland of worldwide importance. Over 250,000 waterfowl and tens of thousands of shorebirds stop at Cheyenne Bottoms each year to feed and rest on their annual migration. One of these birds is the whooping crane, pictured here at Cheyenne Bottoms. Whooping cranes are the tallest birds in North America, and they're on the endangered species list. This means that they are very rare, and Kansas is lucky that we can help them survive. X is for X-ray vision, one of the superpowers that Superman uses to help keep the world safe. X-ray vision allows the superhero to see through everything except lead. Superman is originally from the planet Krypton, but his parents put him on a spacecraft and sent him away to keep him safe when he was just a small baby. The spaceship crashed near the fictional town of Smallville, Kansas, and that became Superman's home. Smallville is a fictional town, which means it is not real, but the real town of Hutchinson, Kansas actually changed its name to Smallville, Kansas for one day in honor of Superman. Y is for yellow, the color of sunflowers. The wild native sunflower is the state flower of Kansas. It was the first state symbol that the legislature chose to represent Kansas. Even before the sunflower became a state symbol, Kansas was known as the Sunflower State. It's a bright, cheery flower that likes to keep its face turned to the sun. And Z is for zoos. Kansas has many zoos where we can learn about animals. They're home to animals who live in the wild in Kansas, like this bobcat. They're also home to animals like elephants, giraffes, and penguins that live in the wild far away. Zoos also help preserve animals who are threatened by extinction. They are one reason we can still see bison in the wild today. When there were very few bison left in the wild, some of them were placed in zoos where they were cared for until it was safe to turn them loose in the wild again. So we have a lot to thank zoos for. So Kansas is the place to be, and we saw Kansas A to Z. So there are many choices for what you could choose from A to Z for Kansas. And I'm sure you have some that I haven't thought of. So that is the end of my presentation.
Wonderful. Let's go ahead and have you stop sharing at the top of the screen. And classrooms. I am very curious. Let me pop on the screen as well. I'm very curious of which of the letters you thought was the most interesting. Teachers, if you'll just pop in the chat, which is the letter that students were excited about, we'd love to hear about it. And Lois, out of that list, I know it's difficult for you to pick, but what are some of your favorites?
You know, I live out in the country in Kansas, and I can see the sunset from my house across the fields, and I think that's one of my favorite things. Maybe that and wildflowers.
Those are both things that bring extra beauty to our state, and I agree with you. Those sunsets are the best. And folks are still in there typing just a minute. We'll give them a moment, but I have to say I'm a big fan of the Smallville Superman story as well. It's such a great thing when we had people excited to call Smallville, Hutchinson become Smallville. And we have a vote for the zoo. That's the one that most people are excited about. We do have a pretty special set of zoos here. So
zoos are fun.
All right. Well, thank you, Lois, for your time today. Thank you, boys and girls, and you have a great rest of your Kansas Day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.